1-2. In the dusty heart of the frontier town, where the winds carried the whispers of dreams both fulfilled and broken, there lived a young woman named Eliza Mayfield, whose beauty was undeniable, but whose fate seemed cursed with rejection. From the moment she came of age, suitors lined up at her father's door. Men from ranches, traders from the market, even wandering drifters with nothing but hope in their saddlebags. Yet each one, after spending days or weeks at her side, always turned away with an excuse. Some said she was too proud. Others whispered that she was too quiet. And many simply left without explanation, leaving Eliza staring at their retreating backs, her heart bruised but not broken. The townsfolk began to talk, for people always talk where secrets are scarce. "She's too difficult," one woman muttered at the general store. "No, she's cursed," another whispered while filling her basket with flour. By the time Eliza turned 20, her name was wrapped in rumor, and her family bore the sting of embarrassment. Her father, weary and ashamed, began to pressure her to accept whomever would come next, no matter the man's character. But suitors had grown fewer, and those who came never stayed. Night after night, Eliza sat by her window, the soft glow of lantern light, framing her silhouette as she wondered why no man saw her worth. Her heart longed not for riches or status, but for someone who would stay, someone who would see beyond the walls she built to protect her tender soul. One evening, after yet another suitor had left, Eliza overheard her father saying bitterly to her mother, "She'll never find a husband. No man will have her." The words pierced Eliza like a knife. She pressed her hand against her chest and felt her breath falter. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks as she whispered to the darkness, "Then perhaps I'll never be wanted at all." Yet fate has a curious way of weaving its threads where least expected. On a summer's day, as the town bustled with its usual rhythm, a tall figure rode into town on horseback. He was a cowboy, broad-shouldered, his hat shadowing eyes that held both storms and kindness. His name was Cole Turner, a drifter with calloused hands and a heart hardened by loss, but softened by hope he didn't dare admit. He had no intention of settling down in this town. His plan was to sell some cattle, buy supplies, and move on. But destiny, sly and unyielding, had other plans. Cole first noticed Eliza outside the bakery, her dress catching the wind, her hair tumbling like spun gold in the sunlight. She wasn't laughing like the other girls, nor was she trying to catch anyone's attention. Instead, she was carrying a loaf of bread, her expression distant, as though her thoughts weighed more than the bread in her hands. Cole's gaze lingered. Something about her stirred a quiet ache in his chest, something he couldn't explain. Later that evening at the saloon, Cole heard the men talking. "That's Eliza Mayfield." One man chuckled over his drink. "Pretty face, but no man keeps her." Another laughed. "She's a lost cause." Cole frowned, his jaw tightening. He didn't like the way they spoke, like she was nothing more than a broken horse no one could tame. He sipped his whiskey, but the words stayed with him. The next day, Cole happened upon Eliza again, this time outside the church. Her arms were full of flowers she was arranging for Sunday service. As one bouquet slipped, Cole stepped forward, catching it before it hit the ground. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world went still. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice like a fragile melody. "Much obliged," he replied, tipping his hat. He could have walked away, but something rooted him there. "You do this every week?" he asked, gesturing to the flowers. She nodded. "It's my way of making things brighter, I suppose." Her eyes held a sadness that belied her gentle smile. A sadness Cole recognized, loneliness. And in that moment, he understood her far more than the townsfolk ever could. Over the following days, their paths crossed again and again, at the market, at the well, even on the dusty road that led to the fields. Each encounter was brief, yet each one left behind an unspoken connection, fragile but growing. Eliza felt it too, though she dared not hope. After all, every man who came before had left. Why should this cowboy be any different? But Cole was different. He wasn't a man looking for a polished bride or a perfect reputation. He was a man who knew what it meant to be broken and to keep going anyway. He saw in Eliza not a curse, but a quiet strength, a heart that had endured rejection and still chose kindness. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and painted the sky in shades of fire, Cole found Eliza sitting by the riverbank. her reflection trembling in the rippling water. He sat beside her without asking, the silence between them comfortable, like two weary souls who had finally found rest. After a long while, he spoke. "I hear folks say things about you," he admitted. She stiffened, bracing for another wound. But his next words caught her breath. "I don't care what they say. I see you." Eliza turned, her eyes wide and wet with unshed tears. No man had ever said that to her. No man had ever looked at her like Cole did in that moment. With honesty, with gentleness, with a promise unspoken. She whispered, "You'll leave too, like the others." Cole shook his head slowly. "Not me, I ain't running from you." And there, beneath the twilight sky, something shifted. The walls around Eliza's heart trembled, cracks forming where hope slipped in. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't one of rejection, but of waiting for the right soul to finally say yes. Their days were threaded with something far greater. Love that grew sturdier with every challenge. Yet it was when Eliza discovered she was with child that their love deepened into something unbreakable. She had feared, after so many years of rejection, that perhaps she would never know the joy of motherhood. But when she told Cole one early morning, the sun barely cresting the horizon, his face lit up with a joy so fierce it took her breath away. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her gently despite her protests, his laughter echoing through the small house. "A little one," he said, pressing his forehead to hers. "Eliza, we're gonna have a family." The months that followed were both tender and trying. Pregnancy weighed heavy on Eliza, her body growing weary, her back aching, her steps slower with each passing day. But Cole was there for every moment, steady and unwavering. He rose early to complete his chores so he could be home sooner, rubbing her swollen feet, fetching water in the heat, holding her when fear crept into her heart at night. "You ain't alone," he'd whisper, pulling her close. "Never again." And she believed him, for he had never once given her reason to doubt. When the day of birth arrived, the heavens themselves seemed to tremble. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and rain poured heavy on the roof of their small home. Hours stretched endlessly as Eliza labored, her cries filling the night, Cole at her side, gripping her hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You can do this, darling," he whispered over and over, his voice a lifeline in the storm. And when at last the cry of new life pierced the air, tears streamed down both their faces. The midwife placed the tiny bundle into Eliza's arms, and she gazed down at her daughter, her heart swelling with a love so fierce it shook her to her very soul. The baby's eyes fluttered open, reflecting both her mother's gentleness and her father's strength. "She's perfect," Eliza whispered, her voice breaking. Cole leaned close, pressing a kiss to his wife's temple, his rough hand trembling as it brushed against his daughter's tiny cheek. "She's ours," he said, pride and wonder lacing every syllable. They named her Grace, for she was a gift neither had ever dared to hope for. From that day forward, their little home was filled with the sound of laughter and soft cries, the smell of fresh bread and wood smoke, and the warmth of love that had been tested by rejection and proven true by choice. Grace grew, cradled not only in the arms of her parents, but in the certainty of a love story the town had once deemed impossible. And though whispers still followed Eliza when she walked through the market, they no longer pierced her heart. For every cruel word, she had the gentle touch of Cole's hand in hers, the sound of their daughter's laughter at home, the knowledge that she was no longer unwanted, no longer alone. She was chosen. She was loved. Years later, as she watched Cole teaching, B3, Grace to ride a pony in the pasture, the little girl's laughter ringing like bells in the open air, Eliza felt a peace she had never known. She thought back to the nights she had wept by her window, believing no man would ever stay, no heart would ever see her worth. And yet here she stood, a wife, a mother, a woman who had been chosen by a cowboy who had said yes when all others said no. She whispered a prayer of gratitude, tears slipping down her cheeks not from sorrow but from joy too full to contain. For her story was not one of rejection after all, but of patience, of faith, and of a love that had bloomed in the most unlikely place. And as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in colors of fire and gold, Eliza knew that her daughter would grow up never questioning her worth. for she would always see in her parents the living proof that true love does not follow the whispers of the crowd, but the steady beat of two hearts that choose each other every single day.